This build has to be the most OP build I've ever used. So Into the Light launched this week, and with it came the new Onslaught activity, which means we're going to need some really juicy builds to smash out that new game mode and get our favourite god roll weapons. And I'm probably not going to focus too much on builds up until the final shape, since you probably know, build crafting is again going to get even more crazier with the new prismatic subclass coming, so when the final shape does drop, expect a ton of new crazy builds, because it's going to get wild. But today, I'm recovering an old build I focused on a few months ago earlier in the season, to mostly give a refresher of the Gyrfalcon's build for new and returning players, so that we can just really go to town with volatile weapons and abilities. And there's kind of two builds that you can use, so I will show both of these builds in this video. But on one side you have the Gyrfalcons, and on the other you have the Orpheus to get infinite supers. Both are incredible builds, especially in the Onslaught, because of the amount of adds and its scaling difficulty. And the best part about this, or these builds, is that both Edge Transit and Recluse are void weapons, and they do have some perks that are great for ad clearing to give us volatile rounds and overshields if we want to go that route. And it just demolishes everything, especially when you pair it with Stylish Executioner to just go invisible on almost every single kill. It's wild. So guys, if you like this one, then a rating is much appreciated, and now let's jump into it. So Onslaught has finally arrived, and honestly it's a great place for us to really push builds to the limit and test out exactly what they are capable of. Which is why if you are looking for some new amazing builds to use in Destiny 2 Into the Light up until the final shape in June, then be sure to check out my Season 23 Into the Light build playlist, which you can find linked down below. But for this one today, we're going to be going over the good old Gyrfalcons and Orpheus Rig builds that we made earlier in the season, because with all the new players joining us for Into the Light since it's free content, I feel like now is the perfect time for new and returning players to set up some of these builds to take into the new Onslaught activity. So with this build, or builds, you're going to get faster supers if you're going the Orpheus route, you'll get infinite volatile rounds, infinite devour, infinite invis, which honestly is just crazy. To think that you're going to be melting everything anyway with this setup, but going invisible at the same time just takes it to the next level. Now with Into the Light, we actually got a few new, or shall I say returning weapons that pair well with this build. These are the Recluse and Edge Transit. Now I've covered both of these weapons in separate videos, so if you're chasing a god roll for those weapons, then feel free to check out those videos as I do cover them. But what's really good about having these two weapons with this build is that they can roll with both Destabilizing Rounds, which means final blows will cause nearby targets to become volatile, which is great when combined with Stylish Executioner, because that will make us invisible when defeating volatile targets, and we just rinse and repeat that on a loop, which is essentially doing Gyrfalcon's job, which means you can then replace that with Orpheus Rig and still benefit from the volatile invis loop. The other perk is Repulsor Brace, where defeating void debuff targets grant an overshield, so you can even use that and always get invis, instant health and overshields on every single kill, which is OP as hell, especially when you use this in an activity that constantly has ads running at you, so Onslaught is a perfect place to use this build. And you can use both of those perks together because they rule in separate slots. So the way you'll use this build is you'll first run in and dodge to go invisible. You'll then come out of invis and kill two adds with a void weapon to spawn an orb and a void breach while getting volatile rounds. Picking them up will give ability energy and devour, which then means you're constantly refreshing your health while going invis at the same time when getting kills. And when you use this in an activity like Onslaught, where you have tons of adds around all the time, you can just constantly run around melting everything with those void explosions, whether you're using Edge Transit, Recluse or just any weapon, because the only requirement for this build to be effective is to apply volatile to enemies. Heck, you can even use Sunshot if you want to, benefit from this season's Radiant effect on top. As long as you're applying volatile debuffs, you can use what you want most of the time, but the build does work better with void weapons. Now with our first exotic, the Gyrfalcons, your void weapons will gain volatile rounds after you emerge from being invisible, so because of that, we're going to use our first void aspect, the Stylish Executioner, and what this does is make you invisible when you defeat a volatile target. So first we're getting volatile rounds for our void weapons, and then we're going invisible when defeating volatile targets, and then that just loops, and that's how that loop works. But to initially get that invis to begin that loop, we're going to either use our second aspect, the Vanishing Step, where dodging makes you invisible, or we're going to use the Destabilizing Rounds to apply a volatile debuff to the surrounding enemies when we get a final blow on an enemy. So that will trigger that loop, and you'll use both of these void aspects regardless whether you're using a Gyrfalcon's or Orpheus rig. But if you are using Orpheus, you will be able to get faster supers, which is more beneficial in higher end content or higher rounds on the legend difficulty of Onslaught. Just remember though, without Gyrfalcons, you will ideally need to use a void weapon with Destabilizing Rounds, or take advantage of your long lasting tether that you will get regularly to be able to apply those volatile debuffs. But good weapons to pair with this build right now are a funnel web, Recluse, Edge Transit, which was once a meme but now it's actually pretty good, and a commemoration machine gun. Once Hammerhead comes out, you could probably use that as well, but there are quite a lot of good void weapons to use this season. Now to get Devour for the instant health on kills and faster grenades, you'll want to use the Echo of Starvation Void Fragment, where picking up a Void Breach or an Orb of Power grants Devour. Now I tend to use the other fragment, Echo of Cessation, where defeating a volatile target creates a Void Breach, just because it's very consistent, but you don't need to have this on because we'll also generate the orbs as well anyway. And we'll do that by using a Void Siphon mod in the helmet, assuming that you're using a Void weapon, so make sure you have that one on so that you can generate those orbs. You do also want to be using the Echo of Persistence so that buffs last longer, and this does help a lot in endgame content, where killing ads just takes a bit more time, so make sure you have that one on. And then the last fragment I'm using is Echo of Dilation, so that we can get extra stats to try and get that triple 100 build for mobility, resilience and intellect. If you don't want to use that fragment, your alternative would be Echo of Expulsion. Now the other things I'm using in the subclass are the Deadfall super for the longer lasting tether, which is probably the best super to use when dealing with constant ads and yellow bar ads. Great for endgame content. For the dodge, I'm using a Gambler's Dodge, then I have a Triple Jump, Snare Bomb and a Vortex Grenade. All of these are fully flexible choices, so you can use what you prefer. It doesn't really affect the build at all, but since this build isn't dedicated to a specific season, you don't need to use any artifact perks either, so you can just enjoy using the build throughout Into the Light, or even through the final shape as your starting build if you want to use this next season, or shall I say next episode. But for this season, if you do want to use these seasonal mods, the ones I recommend right now during Season of the Wish are this one here, so you can increase the ability damage to Taken and Scorn, Wished into Being for orbs when close to a full super, Solo Operative if you're playing solo, I tend to use this quite a lot, and then Argent Ordnance if you're using rocket launchers and generally want to try and pull off more DPS when doing things like a raid or dungeon. But the build will work fine without these perks, so they are just a bonus. Not as good as previous seasonal perks we've had in the past, but some are better than none, so it is up to you if you want to use them or not. Moving on to the mods, these are fairly important. So I just have 2 heavy ammo finders and a void siphon in the helmet. You don't need the finders on, those are optional. But for the arms, I have a firepower and 2 bolstering detonations for the reduced class cooldown. Chest, I have my damage resist mods, which you will want to change depending on the activity you're playing or what modifiers are active. Legs, I have my scavenger mod and some cooldown ones again for the class ability. And then in the class itself, I am using 2 utility kickstart mods because your primary focus is going to be getting that dodge back as quick as possible for that next base invis charge if you're relying on the dodge to start the invis volatile loop. This is important especially in endgame content where you might run out of time before getting kills with say a primary void weapon if you don't use a machine gun. But either way, this build is going to do a fantastic job for you guys in all types of content. Now the alternative build is using the Orpheus. You'll mostly use the same setup, except the only primary difference is that you'll have Orpheus instead of Gyrfalcons, so that you can get faster supers. But if you're using the Orpheus build, you will want to swap out the Echo of Dilation fragment for Echo of Reprisal, so that you can get more super energy when surrounded, just to give you that extra boost, because Orpheus is capped at 50%, so the remaining 50% energy you'll need to get elsewhere. Which is why having 2 people run the Orpheus build is probably the best way to go when you're playing activities like Onslaught, because it can just be constant supers over and over if you're both running it smoothly. Anyway, this here is the full mod screen setup for Gyrfalcon, so feel free to copy it if you want to, and then this one is for the Orpheus rigs, but the dim links for both builds will be down below anyway. Honestly, now has never been a better time to experiment with different builds, because Onslaught to me is like the perfect battleground for testing new and old builds to see how far they can go, especially in the legend difficulty where it scales in difficulty. But honestly, these builds are just the perfect builds to use for the remainder of Into the Light, and you guys definitely need to get them set up if you haven't already. But guys, that's all I got for this one today. If you found this video useful, then you might like some of my other builds, which you can find in the playlist down below. Otherwise, thanks for tuning in, and as always, have a good one, and I'll see you guys in the next video.